Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show.
I say.
My name is Justin. That's Cliff.
I
And
say.
this is Torn Tuesday, the OneRing.net's
I say.
weekly dose of all things Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and now Amazon, and books, and letters, and Hobbitses, and everything else. Cliff is the writer-producer of Ringers, Lord of the Fans. You've also published some books. The People's Guide to J.R.R. Tolkien.
Indeed.
And
Actually written many articles for Deviant Art, for Famous Monsters of Filmland, and for other articles and, ephemera here and there around the world.
And you were a lead contributor to Green Books, our old website's section that was devoted to, how do you describe it? Informed intellectual discovery.
You would say it was a monthly online magazine that had long-form articles and specialty interviews related to an in-depth study of Tolkien. We also had a very popular questions and answers. One of the biggest things that the OneRing.net ever had was our Q&A, because people back in the day were, we didn't have thousands of YouTubers. Okay?
YouTube didn't exist. We're so
There
old.
was no content.
So old.
There was no content to answer. And for the people who wanted to dig into the real granular nerd stuff, they would submit questions. And we, the staff of the OneRing.net, would do our best to research into the existing works of J.R.R. Tolkien.
That's right.
Here is his published letters, all of Tolkien's personal letters. And I say, as if I were standing on the floor of Parliament, trying to catch the attention of the opposing party, I say.
The OneRing.net's been through many phases. This phase of our little
goofy
online video show, which is now commonly called a podcast.
It is a podcast.
We
but
did
it's a
not
live stream.
we did not call it a podcast. In fact, technically, we're not a podcast because we're not available on any podcast. I want to know from you, the fans. Do you listen to podcasts? You can tell us in the chat. I see you on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch. I see you all. Do you listen to podcasts, and
Hello,
where
everyone.
do you find those podcasts? Are you on Spotify? Are you on Apple iTunes podcasts? Where do you guys find your podcasts? Because we want to start putting the audio of this.
Is it all Apple?
No,
Is
it's
it all
not
Apple Podcasts.
But
the world of podcasts, I understand, is dominated by Audible and by Apple. Who else? Who else is in the world of providing podcast subscription and interface for podcast users to actually get what they want? We're talking about a delivery interface. I don't know.
That's what I want to know.
That's
Where
what I wanna know.
where
Where
are
you guys?
people watching? Where are people watching or listening to podcasts?
I say.
Have
you ever read the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien?
I have not.
Pronounce Tolkien, sir.
I have not. Cliff,
It's
we've
the
been
best. It's the single best thing that any Tolkien fan can ever do for themselves. Read Tolkien's published
People
letters.
in the chat room are
His
saying
letters,
I go
it's the
through
best.
iTunes for all my podcasts. Tamar says true crime podcasts are my favorite thing when listening to and working out. I use the podcast app on my iPhone, so that would be Apple as well.
Yep.
Princess Toy Nerd says I make podcasts on YouTube. And the podcast is called Tea and Tolkien Thursdays. I love it. Brennan Marr does his own podcast. Where do you guys
Spotify.
post this? That's what I was asking. Is it on Spotify? Is it on YouTube? Is it on iTunes? Where do people listen? Podbean is the service that Brennan Marr uses. But Podbean, no one goes there. I think you distribute it to everything, right?
I don't know, but
so we got to find a home for this because a lot of people listen to podcasts and don't have the time to sit here and watch us live.
Well, actually, they're watching the road. Usually, these are people who are commuters, and maybe they're on the train, on the commuter train. Like Liam Neeson.
Yes.
Or maybe they're on the freeway. Like in La La Land, where everyone stops and does a big musical number on the 405.
Right.
You never know.
Man.
But
that was so lame.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking that the best place to get your audio version of podcasts would be one centralized place. And for most people, I'm sure it's either through Apple or Spotify or Audible, if Audible is also there in
Yeah,
that
and
realm.
that's owned by Amazon. Andrew says, I watch Torn Tuesday on YouTube. I appreciate that. CJ says, the Google Podcast Player. Brandon says Spotify. A lot of people actually listen on YouTube. That's pretty good. Tamar says, it is like 1 a.m. here in England. I have nothing better to do. I thank you for staying up and watching us. I saw someone else saying that they're watching from the hospital. Get well. I hope you're doing fine. I hope this show brings a little bit of levity to your situation. As always, now we have...
I say, you're under strict orders.
We have
to
a
heal
hotline.
And get better. Get better now.
530-64-FRODO is our phone number. That's really our phone number. 530-64-FRODO.
530-64-FRODO.
You can also Skype us, which we prefer. I've spent a lot of effort getting our Skype working, and so now I've got a fancy little button where I can answer the Skype from right here. So if you Skype us, one word, the One Ring Net. You have to put the in there. TheOneRing. And you can Skype us. We want to see your face. We want to hear your voice.
It's like, who puts a dot on anything? No one goes to .com or .net. I mean, it's like web browsers. What do we even use web browsers for?
Everything's on Twitter and
Everything's
and
on other
YouTube
platforms.
and everything like that.
It is amazing to me. Do you know what? Even in our effort to get pre-production underway for our new indie film,
yes,
our young
successfully crowdfunded.
So successfully crowdfunded, and we're in pre-production. I'm going to ask a big favor. I'm going to look for some special effects, alien creature kind of rig, and I'm going to ask the audience out there later in the show, for people who have experience building and crafting such physical effects, creatures or puppets or some kind of an alien rig. We're going to ask about that later on. But here's the thing. My young director said, hey, we should have a splashy website, a nice big splashy website for our movie going live. And all of us looked at him and said, you might want to take all that effort that you would put into making a website and instead...
We'll have an Instagram account.
Instead, we'll just use the existing platforms we have now and put your energy into previs and getting your shot list and getting other things, and worry about the website later when, because
no one goes to websites.
Because no one goes to websites anymore. But it is actually a funny thing that we're still TOR lowercase n. It's all capital, the One Ring, TOR capitals, but our lowercase n for torn is all because it's a .net. We're still stuck in that. we kind of, it's a thing, but whatever. But hello, everybody. It's nice to have you all on
great
this show.
For the
Thank
feedback.
You.
So give us a call. Cliff, I just want everyone to see that this is the cast of Lord of the Rings.
Oh, their Instagrams have been blowing up lately, haven't they?
Look at how beautiful this cast is.
It is a wonderful, interesting...
Black and white and
cast.
Color and all around.
Oh.
Just a beautiful...
Mocha, caramel and mocha.
Oh, so good. So many accents and flavors.
And vanilla and
it's
cappuccino.
It's exactly what we've wanted since they announced a TV show. Such diversity. And these actors are currently in New Zealand. Everyone's been landing in New Zealand.
Yes, they have.
This week.
Because they're filming
the pilot.
last
Week.
They're going to
be
filming.
They're preparing for the pilot. And so this is the cast of Lord of the Rings. Now, Cliff...
Tamar says, I see some definite elves in there.
What do you... how long was pre-production on the original 1999 shooting of Lord of the Rings? Do you know how many weeks Billy and Dom and Elijah and Sean were there before they actually started roll camera?
They were there for, I understand that they had 6 to 8 weeks.
Yes.
Training, physical training. Equestrian training. Archery training. Sword fighting. Physical, what you'd call stage combat. And also what Terry Notary and other performers do now, it would be like motion performance training. For certain people like Andy Serkis, they were there much earlier.
Yes.
For certain people like Ian McKellen, they were there much later.
Much later. Because he came in after they started shooting.
He was obligated to finish a major feature film called X-Men.
That's right.
And he had to finish that, and so they were they changed things around, but they did have most of the cast there early. One cast member famously abandoned the lead role, and had to be replaced.
That's right.
Our lead role of Sir Ian McKellen and our other lead role of Viggo Mortensen, the most important, perhaps arguably, the guys who had the most screen time besides Frodo. Here you go. They were there at the very last minute, while everybody else had the luxury of preparing for a couple of months.
Yes.
Don't envy them. Do not envy any poor actor who has to run in at the last minute and join the rest of the team and try to catch up to speed.
And
It's a challenge.
I
It's a
believe
challenge.
Dominic Monaghan was the last of the hobbits to show up.
Well done, by the way. Well
Elijah
done.
and Sean were there. Billy came next. If Billy was on the same flight as Orlando Bloom, and then Dominic, I think, came in a few weeks after that.
Orlando was a newborn baby when he got down there.
They
Orlando
were all
Bloom
babes.
was
They
just
were
a-
all babes.
He was just a puppy. He was just a little newborn puppy, so innocent and doe-eyed. You know what this reminds me of? Since we're talking about what happened 20 years ago,
Yes.
I went onto YouTube for some bloody reason, I don't know why, and the algorithm forwarded to me a suggestion of a YouTuber who was watching the Lord of the Rings trilogy for the first time ever.
Okay.
And it was, he's a famous YouTuber who does a lot of film commentary. His name is Dylan. Dylan is in trouble. That's his handle, that's his account. Dylan is in trouble. That's a funny guy. And he reminds me of who I was 20 years ago when I had that fresh-eyed look on my face. And I was like, oh, can't wait for this Lord of the Rings stuff. And it was really, really cool. People who don't know anything about the books or the stories, and they're like watching Lord of the Rings all these years and years later, they often think that there's some larger like fantasy RPG stuff that's going to go on. And perhaps like Dylan, expected to have the ring, the one ring, give Frodo all kinds of powers. And that's what his main complaint was. He got through all of it. He watched all of the extended editions. It was very entertaining to watch him respond to the movies.
Yes.
But at the end, he said, why is it he's got this magic ring and it does nothing except prevent him from getting old? And a lot of people might falsely expect the way that he was also complaining that Gandalf was not casting enough spells. Not like Dumbledore and Voldemort cast spells at each other in the Harry Potter films. Like Gandalf's use of magic, because Tolkien wrote it that way, and the use of the rings of power, because Tolkien wrote it that way, is very subdued. Subdued. So much subdued that Gandalf was actually forbidden to show his open face of power.
That's
and
right.
Expose his power
In the Third Age.
to the enemy's power.
Yeah.
He was supposed to likewise keep his power hidden.
He wasn't supposed to help any of the peoples of Middle Earth.
No. He was supposed to help them help themselves.
Right.
Help them
He
help
wasn't
themselves.
supposed to do the work for them.
Exactly. So I find...
So the question I have for you is, that's the Third Age Gandalf.
Yeah.
What is magic like in the Second Age, which the TV show will be based in? Is there more use of magic? And is there a reason that by the Third Age, Tolkien had said...
The use of magic by wizards was non-existent in the Second Age because there were no wizards, period. No wizards in the Second Age. So don't expect them in the Amazon series.
Correct. Not even young Gandalf, because Gandalf was never young. He appeared as an old man.
Always.
And he left as an old man.
Now, here's the thing. The idea that...
Sorry, baby Gandalf.
magic, yeah, no baby Yoda, baby Gandalf analogy here, but Celebrimbor, who was crafting magic rings, the elves were practicing magic of a certain unique kind, as were the dwarves, especially the Noldorin elves, who any of them had picked up from the tradition of Feanor. Now, Feanor was the guy who captured the light of the two trees inside the gemstones that became so historically important, the Silmarils. That kind of magic, transferring ethereal power or supernatural power or light into physical objects, is something as old as the Silmarillion. So that happened way before the forging of the Rings of Power.
But so when they forge the Rings of Power, there is some sort of malice put into these rings, right? There is some sort of magic. Hey, did you
Well,
guys all see The Rise of Skywalker? We're all caught up on Star Wars, right? Okay, because we're going to talk about it in a couple minutes. But Cliff, the thing that I think we're going to see in this TV show, which I expect.
Well, we're not going to see magic like Melisandre and the woman in red doing magic and stuff in Game of Thrones.
Why not?
We're not going to see Harry Potter level of people doing magic.
Why not?
Like they do in Harry Potter. Because
wait,
in Middle
hold on,
Earth,
why?
magic is subdued.
He imbues the power into all of these 20 rings, these 19 rings.
You mean Sauron? When you say he, is that the pronoun you're referring to as Sauron?
Sauron.
Or are you
is
referring
a
to
he
Celebrimbor?
And a she, whoever. Doesn't Sauron hire someone to make the rings?
No, Sauron doesn't hire any. Oh my God, this guy doesn't bloody know. Look, nobody hires anybody to make the bloody rings. Celebrimbor was taught the craft of ring making by Sauron without Celebrimbor even knowing that the evil guy, who would be the eventual Dark Lord of Mordor, was actually scheming to show Celebrimbor this craft. It seems that the elves, even Galadriel managed to capture the light of Elendil inside a liquid that was in a glass vial. She manages to use a glass water mirror to scry events of the past and the future.
Yes.
There is magic among the elves, especially along Galadriel's line because she's bloody related to Fëanor. Okay, the dwarves are capable of a certain kind of magic by imbuing properties, supernatural properties, into physical things. They've done this too. The elves can make blades that glow when the orcs or goblins are nearby. That's magic. But you're not going to get spellcasting like in the Order.
No, I don't expect.
Remember the Order of the Phoenix? Remember the spellcasting when Dumbledore and Voldemort were fighting in the Ministry of Magic?
Yes.
And it's this wildly kinetic, visual, splashy visual effects magic. You're not going to get that in Middle-earth. It is never written that way.
Well,
and if the showrunners at Amazon think that they can get away with injecting that type of shift in tone with the way the magic system is run in Middle-earth, well, then they're going to get a lot of blowback from the fans because we all know that's not the way Tolkien wrote magic operations in the world.
But isn't Melisandre's magic in Game of Thrones more subdued than that? Yeah, I mean, they're controlling the elements.
Yeah, see, now here's where George R.R. Martin was inspired by Tolkien's interesting approach to having magic be muted.
Yes.
Yeah, it's Martin being very influenced by Tolkien.
So we can expect that in the Second Age because there were magic rings, not just the ones Celebrimbor made and not just the ones Sauron made, but like there was a thing in the Second Age of like imbuing objects with magic and power.
And Sauron perhaps wanted to take advantage of Celebrimbor's skills,
yes,
and also Celebrimbor's ambitions. This is what an interesting character interplay looks like to me. It's not about the magic. It's about Sauron trying to manipulate Celebrimbor as a great, powerful elven lord without Celebrimbor ever having a clue that Palpatine was right there in the Senate, right in front of him the whole time. You know what I mean?
Well, here's the thing I wanted to bring up with Rise of Skywalker.
Let me just clarify that all of the rings were made by Celebrimbor and his elven smiths.
Yes.
Sauron only made one ring separately himself in Mount Doom, which the elves call Orodruin.
Yes.
That's where and that last ring was designed to be the ultimate piece of the puzzle that would tie control of all the other rings together.
So he still imbued some sort of control mechanism in these rings.
He did.
And also
the three rings for the elves were not touched by Sauron's hand.
I refuse to believe that the rings were just jewelry gifts. There must have been some sort of power that was promised with the rings. Sauron must have gone around and said, with this ring, you will grow in certain power or something. Like he must have played to the egos of someone. Cliff, I wanted to bring up Rise of Skywalker, Star Wars, because throughout the history of Star Wars, we've talked about the Force, and we've talked about midichlorians once in one movie, and never again. And we've talked about this.
Well, the midichlorians got mentioned a couple of times in the animated series.
Okay, but you can feel the Force around you, but you never see it.
Yes.
Correct? Yeah. The Force was just was as much a mental, cognitive ability to control as just a thing that surrounds us. But we never saw it. Rise of Skywalker, at the end, suddenly there's a visual representation of the Force being dragged out of the character and resuscitating Palpatine. You can see like a giant glow. It's kind of like you said, the Order of the Phoenix battle. You see matter. You see light and matter.
Well, that was like Palpatine
extracted,
like acting like a Dementor and sucking the soul out of Harry.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
That was Dementor inspired. Visually,
you guys saw that.
Yeah, we did.
So Dementors did that in Harry Potter. Star Wars, JJ kind of stole that. I've never seen the Force represented as matter or light, and it totally took me out of. I'm like, oh my God, we're looking at a Harry Potter movie now. Like he's sucking the energy force out of it. The question is, if they can do that with Star Wars, with something that's been totally invisible, what's to stop Amazon from creating rings that glow?
Nothing.
And the force
there's
put
nothing
into
to
it,
stop them.
and the Galadriel's water. I'm like, hey, let's drag this Dementor style. Galadriel will drag the light of Elendil out of this and throw it into that. Like that's not what you want to see, but it has to happen.
It has to happen. Why?
Because she has to make the magic water. She has to make Galadriel's Tears of Elendil or whatever it's called.
Here it is. Nothing is there to stop them from doing it, to answer your question. What is to stop them? The writers, Patrick McKay and what's his name? The other guy.
J.D.
Salinger. No. The other
Walsh.
one.
No.
Yeah, okay. I'm joking.
Yes.
There's nothing to stop them from doing it, but the blowback from the fans, the way that the Tolkien audience is going to respond to, them playing fast and loose with the world of Middle-earth, especially when they made such a big deal about getting tied in with the Tolkien estate. Especially when they made such a big deal about allegedly bringing on a Tolkien scholar named Tom Shippey. When they set forth all of these early flags to tell everyone, trust us, we're going to handle the property like we're going to handle it with integrity. And then you expect them to go off and produce a Dumbledore versus Voldemort style visual effect, Palpatine pulling the life force out of Rey.
Right. We've never seen that in a Star Wars movie or TV show.
You're going to get blowback.
It ruined the Force for me.
Yes, and you're going to have fans of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and The Silmarillion respond to the studio by doing what fandom will do. They will call out inconsistencies. They will call out something that is spiritually dishonest or intellectually dishonest in representing Middle-earth. And you and I might be the front line of that, maybe, but that doesn't matter. All the fans online will take to the Twitter feed of LOTR on Prime and their Instagram, and the fans will let them know what they think. If all of a sudden they have something crazy happen that isn't supposed to happen,
fidelity
to Tolkien
is the hashtag.
That is our hashtag.
Cliff,
fidelity to
speaking of
Tolkien.
Fidelity to
Oh my
Tolkien.
God.
I want to know if Galadriel pulls the light of Elendil and puts it in a water in a vial, and Sauron wraps his malice into a ring. Is it true to Tolkien? Is it true to the book, Fidelity to Tolkien, to have a visual representation of that energy?
How about they get together with the visual effects team and creative designers who think of something refreshing and original? Example.
How would you create Galadriel's water then?
One of the most original.
Let's stay on Galadriel's water.
How about the way that Frodo enters the Twilight world when he puts on the ring? And the
Was that true to the book?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It was true to the book, but it was also wildly inventive to show this weird, blowing,
wavy,
wispy world of spirit wind. Like the dark corpse wind of shadow that Frodo is caught in, and all of a sudden, metaphysically, across hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, Sauron can spiritually see right through your soul because you've got the ring on, which is connecting you to his consciousness.
Yes. So he
that was
has to imbue his consciousness in the ring somehow.
That they can show visually how Sauron forges
Does he cut
the
off
ring.
his arm and then
Who knows what they're going to do?
How did Harry Potter? How did Voldemort put his
soul into the Horcruxes?
Yeah.
Well, that's what the One Ring is. The ultimate Horcrux is the One Ring.
There you go.
You know where J.K. Rowling got that idea from, but it wasn't shown. The Harry Potter books don't show how he tore off a piece of his soul.
They don't.
And Voldemort or Tom Miarvolo Riddle put a piece of his soul into that object.
They don't.
They don't show it.
Just like they don't show how
midi-chlorians
work, to strengthen a Jedi until the last until Rise of Skywalker. So that was weird. Speaking of Horcruxes, so that means that Sauron carves a piece of himself 19 ways because there are 19 rings?
No. Sauron did not carve pieces of his soul into all of those rings. It was the One Ring. But he had the One Ring have the ability to control the others because they were systemically crafted under his teachings by a plan that would make them all, in other words, network together. Sauron taught Celebrimbor how to make the rings in such a way that Celebrimbor did not know, but Sauron/Anatar, he knew that he'd be able to network the whole Wi-Fi thing together, all of it. He would network all of them together after the One Ring was made.
Okay. So
Celebrimbor's consciousness that was involved in making the 3 rings of the elves that Sauron did not touch, for some amazing reason that Tolkien does not really get into in a granular way, Celebrimbor knew that Sauron had put on the One Ring in Mordor and was assuming control of the others. So the 3 rings were immediately hidden away. One that was given to Círdan, the shipwright, the only elf to ever be described with a beard. Glad we cleared that up from a few weeks ago. And then one went to Galadriel. And the third one ultimately went from Celebrimbor to, I believe, Gil-galad. And then I think Gil-galad bequeathed it to Elrond, if I'm not mistaken. And then ultimately Círdan gave his ring to Gandalf when Gandalf arrived on his ship from Valinor.
There you go.
Okay.
So the next question I have is, obviously we've seen that the rings of men turned them into afterworld slaves of Sauron.
But in life, they thought they'd be given greater powers over greater kingdoms.
Greater kingdoms and longer life, everything like. The question is,
typical lies.
Does Tolkien say yes or no, or is it not mentioned? If the dwarves that took a ring, do they become ghosts of the afterlife?
No. What happened with the Dwarven rings...
Is it a no that they were never mentioned, or no, it is definitely there aren't any ghost dwarves?
There aren't any ghost dwarves. Period.
Are you sure?
The Dwarven rings were not designed the same way.
Really?
And the Dwarven rings managed, according to Tolkien's projection of this idea, they managed to enhance their greed. And for Sauron, that was a benefit. It made the dwarves forget some of their external interests, and it made them more greedy to dig further and get deeper into collecting their wealth and storing their resources. And, it was, for Sauron, it was like, these are people I can exploit later on, anytime, And he did, by promising to give back one of the missing Dwarven rings. That actually happened. One of Sauron's messengers went and showed up, knock, 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 after the events of The Hobbit, when the War of the Ring was getting ready to open up its opening stage, emissaries of Mordor went and showed up at the Lonely Mountain at Erebor and said to, the king under the mountain, would you like to treat with us and team up with Mordor? We'll do you right, we'll give you resources, and we'll give you your missing ring, one of your Dwarven rings out of the set. That's what really happened.
Okay.
So Sauron had more interest in just making rings to enslave Dwarven kings. He had Dwarven rings to distract them so that they wouldn't meddle in his affairs, and also to use it as bargaining chips later on, and all kinds of stuff. So
is the Arkenstone a Silmaril?
No, the Arkenstone is not a Silmaril. However, it bears qualities that are described with such rapture Tolkien didn't describe anything with as much rapture as he described the Silmarils and the Arkenstone. So that's kind of the way it comes out like that.
Speaking of fidelity to Tolkien, again, we want to remind everybody that everything Amazon is doing, everything that the writer's room is creating from whole cloth, from scratch, is true to Tolkien. Tolkien wanted people to play in Middle-earth.
Oh, well,
he told his story. Tolkien, in his letters, says he told his story. He told his part of Middle-earth, but he encouraged other minds in drama and paint and poetry and music, which filmmaking is. Filmmaking is non-literature art. Even though it starts with a script, the final result is a combination of everything. In his letters, Tolkien encouraged exploration, but said, stay away from the story I've told. Like, he told his story. He made his editorial decisions in conjunction with his son Christopher, rest in peace, to edit The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings exactly how they were published. So Amazon has the full blessing of the Tolkien estate. We should trust their efforts.
Should we?
And quality.
Should we just categorically trust?
We should trust their efforts. The end result can be judged on its own merits, but it's kind of unfair to compare to Tolkien. Because he told his story. He's one of the best stories. I mean, there's a big thing going on around online that procrastination was the main reason he wrote Lord of the Rings. I don't think that's true. I think Tolkien was as pragmatic as anyone growing up with, 3 or 4 kids, right? 4 kids?
Indeed, 4, yes.
4 kids that have to go to college. 4 kids, mouths to feed. A wife who was sick for many of her years. In fact, they had to move a couple times because of her health. Look, Tolkien was a man who had bills.
Can I share this with you?
Yes, go ahead. From the letters of Tolkien.
This is what you're talking about that Professor John Ronald Reuel Tolkien wanted anybody else to take their hands and their craftsmanship to his work, his mythology. Okay? An equally basic passion of mine was for myth, not allegory, however you say it. And not for myth and for fairy story, and above all, for heroic legend. Heroic legend on the brink of fairy tale and history. That was his main interest. Do you hear what he's saying? Okay? Heroic legend on the brink of fairy tale and history, of which there was far too little in the world accessible to me for my appetite.
Accessible storyline. So this can't be some highfalutin Silmarillion stuff.
There was Greek, Celtic, and Romance, and Germanic, Scandinavian, and Finnish, which greatly affected me, but nothing English, save impoverished chapbook stuff. Of course, there was and there is all the Arthurian world, the King Arthur cycle. But powerful as it is imperfectly naturalized, associated with the soil of Britain, but not with the English, and does not replace what I felt to be missing. He felt there was something missing for an English, larger, major mythology, as he is explaining. For one thing, Arthurian stories are too fairy, is too lavish and fantastical, incoherent and repetitive. For another and more important thing, it is involved in and explicitly contains the Christian religion. For reasons which I will not elaborate, that seems to me fatal. Myth and fairy story must, as all art, reflect and contain in solution elements of moral and religious truth or error, but not explicit. When he says solution, he means dissolving into liquid ingredients to make it a salt,
Yes.
That's what he means. He means dissolving into a liquid. He's talking about the ingredients of that story. but not explicit, not in the known form of the primary real world. I am speaking, of course, of our present situation, not of ancient pagan pre-Christian days. And I will not repeat what I tried to say in my essay, which you read. Do not laugh, but once upon a time, my crest has long since fallen, I had a mind to make a body of more or less connected legend, ranging from the large and the cosmogonic to the level of romantic fairy story, the larger founded on the lesser, in contact with the earth, the lesser drawing splendor from the vast backcloths, which I could dedicate simply to England, to my country, period. I hope you guys understand this, what he's saying to you. It should possess the tone and the quality that I desired, somewhat cool and clear, but be redolent of our air, the clime and the soil of the Northwest, meaning Britain and the hither parts of Europe, not Italy or the Aegean, still less the East, which explains why the War of the Ring and most of the people in that part of Middle-earth are also white. That explains all that, right? Very simple. Okay? And while possessing, if I could achieve it, the fair, elusive beauty that some call Celtic, though it is rarely found in the genuine ancient Celtic things. It should be high, meaning, he put that word in quotes, it should be high, purged of the gross, which is why people don't ever go to the bathroom or have sex in The Lord of the Rings. That's what he means by that, okay? And it should be fit for the more adult mind of a land long now steeped in poetry. I would draw some of the great tales in fullness and leave many only placed in the scheme and sketched. The cycles should be linked to a majestic whole and yet leave scope for other minds and hands, wielding paint and music and drama. Absurd. He thought that he was absurd of thinking that he could even do that. He thought, at the beginning of the paragraph, don't laugh, but once upon a time, I had a mind to make a body of work that was more or less connected legend. And
Yes.
at the end of that paragraph, he says, you know, the cycles could be linked to a majestic whole and yet leave scope for other minds and hands wielding paint and music and drama. He ends the paragraph by saying, absurd.
Absurd.
He calls himself out.
In italics.
It's not in italics.
Oh,
It's
okay.
written plain as day.
Absurd.
He's calling himself absurd for even thinking that that could
And
be such
look,
an overreaching purpose.
A modern version of that paragraph is Kevin Feige saying, we will make a connection. We will make a whole of many parts. It's absurd that Kevin Feige would think to take a couple movies and create a world that other minds and bodies can explore in the world.
No.
And now he's pursuing that with television shows, with comic books and stories that play into the MCU. So
Yes.
Tolkien was trying to accomplish the same way Kevin Feige is trying to accomplish.
He actually says, my crest has long since fallen. At the beginning of the paragraph, he says that he had that ambition, but he let it go. He let that ambition go, although he originally had that ambition. And in the next paragraph, he says, of course, such an overweening purpose did not develop all at once. He just admits it.
It's a process.
He admits it.
A process.
He says, the mere stories were the thing. They arose in my mind as given things. And as they came separately, so too the links grew. How about that? He just kind of thought it up as he went along.
Yep.
And he says, of course, I made up and even wrote lots of other things, especially for my children, and some escaped from the grasp of this branching inquisitive theme, being ultimately and radically unrelated. Leaf by Niggle and Farmer Giles, for instance, the only two that have been printed. The Hobbit, which has much more essential life in it, was quite independently conceived. I did not know, as I began it, that it belonged in this big overarching purpose. Isn't that amazing?
Yes,
I wrote a very large article about Professor Tolkien being a traveler, a stranger in his own land. He's a strange, accidental tourist, as I called him. That was the piece that I wrote for DeviantArt.
As most creators are. Look, The Hobbit was special editioned. You know, just as George Lucas before made a movie and then said, hey, this could be a connected whole. And then he started making special editions to connect everything together. Tolkien re-edited The Hobbit before The Lord of the Rings came out.
Heavy retcon on The Hobbit.
Heavy retcon. So
yes,
I just want to respond to a couple people in the chat room. You guys are amazing for keeping us on track. Tolkien is saying, now Cliff, tell me if you agree with this. Tolkien is saying in that letter that you just read that other people should invent stories for England, not reinvent his. I don't think that's accurate.
Say that again. Actually, I wanted to remind everyone that is letter 131.
Letter 131.
I was reading letter number, and every letter of Professor Tolkien is academically referred to by a number, like a Bible verse. It's like if you say letter 131, it's one of the longest and most famous pieces that Tolkien wrote in his letters. So 131, that's where you get that one. Go ahead.
So
ask that question again.
Tolkien is basically telling people to invent stories for England, not for his world. Is that...
No, he thought that if it stuck, if he could create a series of legend and high romantic hero stories that were written on the edge of ancient history, but also felt like they were part of a fairy story, which was a very powerful way for him to connect the human mind to moral purpose.
Yes.
As he wrote in his most famous essay on fairy stories, he thought that eventually if it stuck, because the Arthurian legend wasn't sufficient, then there would be enough there tied to the English soil and the language that other people would dive right on in and dabble in that larger framework of legend.
His legend.
Of his legend, yes.
Not just stories for England, of his legendarium.
But isn't it interesting and perhaps a bit sad that later on in his life, he thought that it was a bit too ambitious for him to think that?
Why.
But his publishers,
that's the measure of the man.
His publishers screwed him over while he was alive and never published the Silmarillion.
Correct.
They wouldn't do it. Maybe my language is harsh.
And he said exactly that in the letter, that I will go into detail on some parts and I will just loose leaf some other parts, but other minds can explore this world. He intended it. He wanted it.
Yeah, he did.
So everything...
And I'm inclined to think that he would be happy now that he's long, long gone. And all these decades later, him looking down on us, he's up there with St. Peter, floating down on a cloud.
Yep.
And I think that Tolkien would probably be quite pleased by the idea that he really did get it to stick.
Yes.
He threw that pasta on the wall and it stuck. You know, that means it's cooked. It's done. It's done. The pasta is well done.
And
you threw it on the wall,
people
it sticks.
are playing in the world.
There's video game designers. There's other fantasy authors.
There's a writer's room making
There's a writer's room
series.
making a billion-dollar TV series.
That's right.
I can't say that he'd be thrilled with every adaptation of his works. You know how he chewed up, Forrest Ackerman, who brought him that Zimmerman script.
Yep.
He didn't like that Zimmerman script, and it was pretty bad.
You didn't like it either.
It was pretty bad. But
I
think now he'd be pleased that people are in the sandbox, and they're playing in the sandbox in Middle-earth.
So Cliff,
I'd be willing to bet he'd be pleased.
Let's remind people, when he says play in this world, we've just determined that he meant playing in the Middle-earth Legendarium.
Yes, the Legendarium. That's actually the popular term for it.
Yes.
We call it the Legendarium.
Yes. So let's remind people that Tolkien himself is not English. He was from South Africa.
Born in South Africa.
In South Africa.
He was transported out of South Africa when he was just a toddler.
But England, even in the 20th century, even in Tolkien's 20th century, England was the melting pot of the world. It was one of the central countries, and London was one of the central cities of trade in the world. That means England was a multicultural society from the day Tolkien was born, the only England that Tolkien ever knew was a multicultural society, one of the centers of trade. You know, the end of the East Indian Trading Company had just occurred. Like, this is not a white society. This is a society from all walks of Europe and South Africa,
Yes.
and North Africa and
Yes.
everything. So it is true to Tolkien to have stories and casts and characters that are not described physically. And in fact, Tolkien does not describe many of his characters physically. I don't think he even describes Aragorn. I think there's only, one or two sentences that describe his visage?
No. When Strider is introduced, he is so well described. He is very well described in the Fellowship of the Ring. Make no mistake. Tolkien does take a minute to actually describe the way that Strider carries himself, especially the way that other people misjudge him at first. Oh, that's all there.
But describe his visage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He describes his visage. Yeah.
So when we look at the cast of Lord of the Rings, a lot of chatter on Instagram and Twitter seems to ascribe certain races of Middle Earth based on the complexion of some of these actors, and I don't think it's true to Tolkien to say the darker-skinned actors are just the bad guys and servants of Mordor and Sauron.
Why would that be?
That's not true, and it's not true to Tolkien.
Look, it's the whole Wakanda thing.
And people saying that the black actor can't be an elf at all because it's not true to Tolkien.
No, that's nonsense.
That's incorrect.
That's nonsense.
It's completely wrong.
Look, the whole thing.
It's a beautiful cast.
It is a beautiful cast.
Three people speak fluent Iranian, so we're gonna have a lot of opportunity to explore the dialects of Middle Earth.
Professor Tolkien told us that the Númenóreans were colonizers. That's why I said it's this whole Wakanda thing, as a reference to that joke that's at Martin Freeman's expense, where Shuri jumps and says, "Oh, you scared the death out of me, colonizer." The Númenóreans are going to be represented properly, I hope, as colonizers, because they do, and they sweep across the coastlands and the other nations, not of Middle Earth, but of other physical regions far and wide, and they take a great deal of influence with them as they colonize other areas of the planet. The planet is Arda, and we have spent most of our time, look, we're fans of The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, and the Silmarillion obviously has never been adapted into a show or a movie, so we've spent most of our time just in that quadrant, as Tolkien just described in that letter, in that northern and western European climate. That's where we've been this whole time, intentionally, as part of the framework of that big Lord of the Rings canvas. But now he also told us, and we have so much evidence of this in his manuscripts, some of which we understand the Amazon writers have access to license some of this material from
the estate,
from Unfinished Tales.
That's right.
From the estate. And they go into detail about how the Númenóreans influenced and brought agricultural development of more advanced tools. Imagine taking a place where you arrive and you lift up these people from the Stone Age right past the Bronze Age and immediately take them to the Iron Age. We're talking about that type of anthropological advancement. So I find that one of the most fascinating things. And there should be lots of new cultures and new colors and all kinds of new places on the map that we get to see as the Númenóreans explore Arda. And I'm looking forward to that, if nothing else.
But it's true to Tolkien that we should be supporting whatever liberties that the writer's room at Amazon takes with these tales, because it is absolutely their prerogative. Tolkien encouraged it, and we should encourage it too. that explore explore these worlds, explore these peoples, and fidelity to Tolkien. Tolkien didn't detail the stories of the Second Age on purpose. You just saw in his letters that he will create threads that people can expand on, and he will write in the leaves of some stories that other people can explore on. Cliff, other news going on this week. Big announcement. Do you remember?
Excuse me, I'm sending a note to my niece. Hello, it's my niece, Brenna. She wanted to find out how to watch the show.
Oh.
And she says, can I access it on my phone? My computer is currently broken.
Yes, go to
And the answer
Facebook.
is, you can use any phone app. You can go to Facebook or YouTube, right on your iPhone app or your Samsung Android phone app. And
find the one
yeah,
ring.
go right ahead, my
Now,
love.
Cliff, did you ever
Thank
watch that show Smallville?
No, I did not watch the show Smallville.
Smallville is was an amazing show.
I know it
We've got a
was.
guy over in the corner wearing a Superman shirt right now. It was basically a youthful version of
Yes.
Superman and Lex Luthor and,
Yes, it
and
was.
everyone. And I know you
And
hate
it was on the CW, for about 6
I know
seasons.
you love that I bring up the
10 seasons? 10
CW
seasons.
a lot.
Yeah.
Because we're gonna get our youthful version of
the-
Middle Earth with Amazon.
I bring up CW because they've been dabbling in the DC universe with all of their shows, and most recently with a very successful Crisis on Infinite Earths, and all that other good stuff going on. But I always talk about it in terms of how the DC extended universe, cinematically, has been kept strangely separate from the explosively popular CW television audience.
I think they need.
I'm not quite sure why there's not a
I think they should be separate.
But you know,
I think they should be separate. They're
we can
different
have our bar back come
storytelling
and we can have our bar back come on the show.
The
and
different
tell us what he thinks
mediums
about that.
require different storytelling efforts, and I would not expect Peter Jackson to have a good time making.
Oh, it didn't break. You actually knocked it down that time, but you didn't break it.
I would not expect Peter Jackson to have a good time making the TV show.
Why does Peter Jackson want to come and do an episode of Doctor Who? Hey, how are you?
Because an
Good to see
episode.
you. What's that? Clifford here.
Jesse.
Jesse, come here, Jesse. Jesse, why is it DC Extended Universe is not being tied into the CW television DC? Why?
I think it's because Warner Brothers desires to keep them separate properties.
Yep.
Although there was a moment in the Crisis on Infinite Earths where the movie's Ezra Miller, who plays the Flash, meets the actor that plays the Flash on the TV.
That's right.
So that was a nice moment, but I think
Much lauded moment. Yeah.
I think it'd be nice to explore more like that, shared stories.
So that's why we're talking about it, because we're not sure if Amazon's new TV, Middle Earth, is going to be quite properly pollinated with the existing 6 films that Jackson made.
Yeah.
I'll correct you on that. It's totally meant to.
He's going to correct me on that. You get back to
totally
work. It's good to see you, brother. The staff of Scum
the-
and Villainy.
the-
Thank you, brother.
The producers at Amazon paid a tidy sum to Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema to acquire the rights to everything, all creatives.
Then how come they're not using all of Weta's
We don't know.
designs?
We don't know
Weta's
yet.
design team.
Why haven't they announced Weta being involved in the show? Period.
Well, I guess, yeah, you know what?
So
I'm making an assumption that I don't even know, but why haven't they announced?
We know for a
The
fact that they
cross-pollination with Weta.
They licensed the old stuff for sure. It's in the contract. So whether creatively they decide to use some of that, but Cliff, I bring up the CW and Smallville because one of the main actors on that played Lex Luthor, shaved his head for 10 seasons.
Yeah, I remember that dude. Oh, there he is.
Michael Rosenbaum has a
Mr. Rosenbaum himself.
new podcast and good friend of the show. And he just launched his new podcast.
And he got Billy and Dom to be on his show?
Billy and Dom
How
to
cute.
have a nice, wonderful hour and a half conversation. And in that show, spoiler alert, you should listen to the whole thing because they tell some stories of showing up in New Zealand and how they met and getting into a fight with Orlando Bloom and fisticuffs and
oh no.
Yeah, it's an amazing conversation about everything. But on the spoiler alert on the podcast, Billy and Dom announced that they used his studio, Michael Rosenbaum's studio and podcast producer, to experiment with a format, an audio format show. So look for Two Hobbs in a Pod, the new podcast from Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan. Two Hobbs in a Pod.
Two Hobbs in a Pod. That's going to be
Two
really fun.
Hobbs in a Pod.
I do have
I'm
to check that out.
so excited. I
I
think they would be the perfect podcast pair to interview everybody. They have so many stories to share, and I think they just work very well. And if you go to our YouTube archives, you can see one of the most wonderful conversations between you, Cliff, and Billy and Dom.
Oh, God,
And
yeah, there's that.
They've been on the show here 2 or 3 times. They've been a gracious friend of the show.
Yes.
Open invite. Please come back on the show, guys.
You guys are overdue to come back on our show.
Yes.
Mr. Billy, Mr. Dominic.
So,
oh my gosh.
Two Hobbs in a Pod. But, one of the things, one of the projects, you got to listen to the podcast, but one of the projects that Dom would love to get off the ground is him and Billy playing brothers in the sneaker industry.
In the sneaker industry?
Yeah, it's a little known fact that Adidas shoes.
Yeah. Adidas
shoes was founded by 2 brothers, and then around in the late 30s, it was a German company, Adidas.
Yeah.
The Third Reich came knocking and said, "Hey, can you make boots and shoes for our troops for Nazi Germany?" And one brother said, "I will not support this fascist dictator," and the other brother said, "Hey, it's good business." So the brothers split. The other brother left the company Adidas, went across the river, and opened a new shoe factory called Puma.
Oh.
So the 2 shoe brands, Puma and Adidas, were founded by brothers who disagreed with the politics of the Third Reich, and Billy and Dom would be great to play in the mode of Jojo Rabbit, playing a couple brothers that found a couple shoe companies. I would watch the heck out of that, Billy and Dom. So look for the new podcast from Michael Rosenbaum. Just look up his name, Michael Rosenbaum, on all your podcast things, and you'll see Billy and Dom. So
that sounds intriguing. I'll have to check that out. And you know what? Yes, again, open invitation, not only to Billy and Dom, but Vigo or Orlando. Orlando, if Katie will let you have 5 minutes off from your busy schedule, skinny dipping in the pool.
Oh, boy.
Come and join us on the show, Orlando. We'd love to have you here.
Vigo, we have some friends that saw your new movie at Sundance.
Elijah, you're invited.
Vigo just directed his first film with Lance Henriksen.
Oh my God!
As playing his father.
The feedback on Vigo's new film is
everyone
huge.
Says that, and the Billy and Dom in this podcast talk about Vigo and their undying love and respect for the talent of that man.
I gotta hear it. I gotta hear it.
So I'm excited, Cliff. This has been a wonderful show. We're at Scum and Villainy Cantina every week. We have people coming in, enjoying the show. You guys are always welcome. If you're ever in Hollywood, make an effort to come to Scum and Villainy Cantina because it's a cool place, and they turn the doors green in the back to make it look like a hobbit hole.
They do indeed. We apologize to the people who are watching and had a bit of buffering, and they're complaining it's a Commodore 64 speed show. That's funny. Do you know what? That was the first computer I ever had, was the Commodore 64. It is wonderful, really wonderful, to have all of you folks here on our live stream show. And it's really fantastic. What a Tuesday we've been having.
Yes. So we're here every week. Cliff, they can follow you, QuickBeam2000 on Twitter and Instagram. And I am at the One Ring Net on all the platforms.
You can find me at QuickBeam2000 anywhere and everywhere. All right. And just be reasonable, and I will be too.
All right. Till next week, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. We'll talk next time on Torn Tuesday. Until then, buenas noches y buena suerte.